Welcome back. In Book 7, Aeneas finally ends his wanderings and comes to Latium in Italy. And this is where the story takes an interesting turn for us, because if the first 6 books were the Odyssean parts of the Aeneid, that is, the parts that involve the wanderings, books 7 through 12 must be the Iliadic books. And this raises some interesting questions for us as readers, because if these are the Iliadic books, Aeneas has come to a place where he will later make war. What does that make him? Does it make him Achilles? Let's give this some more thought by examining the story as it unfolds. After realizing that they are in fact in the right spot, Aeneas sends forth envoys to the king of Latium, a man by the name Latinus. Latinus has just received a prophecy that says that he is not supposed to marry off his daughter to a local, but he must marry her to a foreigner. This is going to spell trouble, because his daughter, Lavinia, was already engaged to be married to a young man named Turnus. So Latinus treats Aeneas' men well, and in fact sends Aeneas' ambassadors back with a couple of hundred horses, in an elaborate chariot complete with fire-breathing horses for Aeneas himself, similar to the ones that Achilles had in the Trojan War. What does Lavinia think about all this? We don't know. She doesn't tell us anything. In fact, she doesn't have much at all to say in this book. What does Lavinia's mom have to say about the fact that her daughter will now be married to a foreigner? She's not very excited. But wait, that's not how it really happens. She's actually okay about it at first, until Juno, taking notice of what has happened, sends down Alecto, one of the Furies, to put anger into the heart of Amata, King Latinus' wife. And what do we know about Alecto? We know this. She's one of the 3 Furies known for being unceasing in anger. And in this book, she will make Amata upset. And she will make her upset by throwing a snake. And you can see that she carries snakes here. She'll make her upset by throwing a snake at her, which will insert its poison into her heart and make her furious with anger. And when she becomes angry, she'll not just yell at her husband, she'll do something extra special crazy. She'll go out into the forest and start worshipping Bacchus, or at least pretend to worship Bacchus. And she'll call all the women of Latium to join her out in the countryside, and abandoning their children, abandoning their weaving, abandoning their household work, and paying tribute to the god. But really, this is just to disguise the fact that she's gone crazy and has been made crazy by one of the gods. What else will happen to stir up trouble in this? Alecto, the same Fury we just discussed, will go visit Turnus, the man to whom Lavinia was engaged to be married. When she breaks the news to Turnus, he isn't that angry about it, until Alecto throws a torch into his chest, makes him catch fire with rage. This rage will compel him to make war upon the Trojans who have just landed in Latium. Everything was going so well, but indeed it would be the Trojans who would make the first trouble on the warfare front. Ascanius, we haven't heard much from him in this story, but that is the name of the son of Aeneas. He's also called Iulus. Ascanius goes hunting one day and happens to kill the deer that was a pet of one of the local families. This will cause some trouble, and suddenly we'll be at war with the locals. The locals will come out with their pitchforks and their torches, and the first man to die will, of course, be an Italian. And so the war between the Trojans who have just landed at their beachhead in Latium and the local Latins, or Italians, will begin. And as if to hammer this home even further, we learn about the opening of the gates of war, the same gates of war I was telling you about in my lecture on Book 1 of the Aeneid. We learn that the locals didn't open this themselves, as if they were unwilling to enter this war, but in fact Juno swung the gates open wide herself, beginning the war. Here also we get a kind of catalog of the heroes who will be involved in this conflict. And the catalog of heroes is entirely composed of local Italians who will be fighting against Aeneas in this conflict. And the last person on this list is the one I'm interested in. Of course, Turnus will be leading the Italians against Aeneas, and Latinus will be caught in between. But it's Camilla that draws our attention. Camilla is a female warrior who comes from the very southern tip of Italy. She's a Volscian. And she fights as a man with men, and her entrance into the story is curious for us. because we have yet another strong female character in this epic, even as we have a couple of other female characters who are either plumb crazy, like Amata, or completely silent about their fate, like Lavinia. Let's turn back for a moment to this topic of the second half of the Aeneid as a kind of proxy for the Iliad, and see how things work out. If Aeneas is the new Achilles, then he's fighting a war against locals. But for what? For a woman that he's fated to marry. Okay. But it sounds an awful lot like he's Paris. If he's a Trojan, and he's coming to your place to take your woman from you. So this is hard to resolve. And I think that Virgil likes this confusion here. I think he likes the fact that even Amata and Juno will compare Aeneas to Paris during the course of this book and mock him in such a way, as will Turnus later on. So it's not entirely clear which one of these guys Aeneas is. If anything, I think what we've seen so far with Aeneas' pietas, he's actually someone altogether different. But others' perceptions of him factor into how we read the book as well. It's in Book 8 that Aeneas will need to seek help. He's alone in the Italian peninsula. He's landed his ships on the shores of Latium, and suddenly he's involved in a war that he didn't seek to start. But I want to return to that for a minute, and what kind of guy Aeneas is in all this. And you have to understand that from the locals' point of view, he certainly looks like a pirate. What kind of person shows up where you live with warships and men dressed in armor and asks to take just a little bit of land? It seems a little strange, doesn't it? Anyway, Aeneas has gotten himself into a bind, and it's time that he looks for help. So this part of the lecture will be called Aeneas Gets Some Help. And he needs some advice. So while Aeneas is sleeping in one of his first nights in Latium, the river Tiber, by the way, that's a real river, it's a river that runs south through the Italian peninsula by the city of Rome. The river Tiber comes and talks to him in his sleep. And it tells him that he needs to seek help by sailing up the Tiber to a place called Pallanteum, which is inhabited by a king Evander, who is a Greek king who left his home in Greece and came and settled Italy. And Aeneas, in order to be sure that this is a real omen, will discover a sow, that's a female pig, nursing 30 baby pigs by the riverside. Indeed, Aeneas wakes up and discovers a sow nursing 30 baby pigs or piglets by the riverside, and promptly sacrifices them to none other than Juno, his arch nemesis. I guess to make nice with her, who knows. In any event, he sails up the river Tiber all the way to Pallanteum, the future site of Rome. And where in Pallanteum is Evander when Aeneas meets him? Evander is standing on the Aventine Hill at an altar dedicated to Hercules. And now I'm calling him Hercules because we're reading a Roman epic, and that's what the Romans called him. Why is Evander, the king of Pallanteum, standing on an altar dedicated to Hercules? Here's why. During Evander's lifetime, Hercules, traveling back from an adventure to steal the cattle of Geryon, fell asleep right there in the future site of Rome, on the Aventine Hill, when the evil fire-breathing monster Cacus stole his cattle. Hercules went looking for his cattle but couldn't find them. Finally, he heard the mooing of his cattle and knew to look for them in the Aventine Hill. How did he get them back from Cacus? He got them back by ripping the top of the Aventine Hill off, jumping down into the mountain, and depending on which version of the story you read, either clubbing Cacus to death or squeezing his neck until his eyeballs popped out. And this is a funny story because the story is a little comical. The name Cacus in Greek simply means wicked or bad, but in Latin means something like crap. So there's a bit of a wordplay here, and it's not entirely clear that we're meant to take this story terribly seriously. But in any event, the great hero Hercules is associated with the future site of Rome. And Virgil's trying to make this place seem a little more important than it actually is. Evander takes Aeneas in and walks him around and shows him the sights. And he actually walks him by all these places that end up being real places in the city of Rome. There's the Porta Cartimentalis, which is a city gate named after Evander's mother. He shows him the Capitoline Hill. He shows them the Tarpeian Rock, which is a rock from which criminals were thrown when they were punished to death. He shows them the Roman Forum. which is the center of Roman political, economic, and social life during the time in which this story was written. He shows them the Lupercal Grotto and the Uniculum, the fortress of Janus. So we get this kind of guided tour of the future sites of Rome, and for the Roman reader who was reading this poem, to think about these places in the very remote past must have been interesting. Sort of like thinking about the place wherever you're sitting right now, 700 years ago, and who was living there and walking around. Evander will offer Aeneas assistance in the help of several hundred troops. He'll offer him assistance through the help of his son, a man named Pallas, who is very young. And he points out a second option for Aeneas. Aeneas can also take help from the residents of Tuscany. The Etruscans have kicked out their king, Mezentius, who's fighting for the bad guys. And they're willing to fight for Aeneas, so Aeneas picks up the help of hundreds more men to help him fight his war against the local Italians. It's at this point in the story that Aeneas' mother, Venus, goes to her husband Vulcan and over a pillow talk convinces him to make some new armor for Aeneas. And Vulcan doesn't need a whole lot of convincing. So he wakes up in the middle of the night and goes to his workshop in Mount Etna, off the coast of Sicily, and there begins making fabulous armor for Aeneas. It's later in this book that his mother, Venus, will deliver it to Aeneas, and the centerpiece of this armor is the shield of Aeneas. And this will be the topic of your discussion this week. I want you to think about how it is or is not like the shield delivered to Achilles in Book 18 of the Iliad. I want you to think about what it depicts and what it doesn't depict, and I want you to think about how specific it is about what it's talking about. Enjoy. Tune in for my next lecture on Books 10, 11, and 12 of the Aeneid.